The text message came on a Thursday morning while I was repotting my rosemary on the back porch. November, cold enough that I could see my breath, but I'd been putting it off for 2 weeks already. My hands were in the soil when my phone buzzed on the patio table. I wiped my fingers on my jeans and picked it up. It was from my daughter-in-law. "Hi, Margaret. Just wanted to let you know we've decided to use the cottage for our own family time this Christmas. Daniel thinks it's better if we have some space this year. Hope you understand." I read it twice. Then a third time. I set the phone face down on the table and stood there for a long moment with my hands still dirty from the soil, looking out at the bare November yard, the birch tree I'd planted the year my husband turned 50, the garden beds I'd wrapped in burlap for the winter. I thought about the rosemary in front of me, how it had survived 3 winters already just from being moved inside at the right time. Then I went in, washed my hands, and called my lawyer. But I am getting ahead of myself. The cottage didn't start as a battleground. It started as a dream that my husband Robert had been carrying around in his coat pocket for most of our marriage. Robert was from a small town north of Kingston, near the Rado Lakes. His father had taken him fishing on those lakes every summer until he was 16, and when his father died, something in Robert quieted. Not broke. He wasn't a man who broke easily, but quieted. For years, he talked about finding a piece of land up there, building something small, something that smelled like cedar and wood smoke and lake water in July. He didn't want grand. He wanted simple, and his. We raised our son Daniel in Ottawa, in a house on a quiet street in Barrhaven with a good school and a backyard big enough for a vegetable garden. I worked as a physiotherapist for 31 years. Robert was a civil engineer with the federal government. We were not wealthy people, but we were careful people, and careful adds up over time. In 2009, Robert was diagnosed with early-onset Parkinson's. He was 54 years old. I remember sitting in the neurologist's office on Riverside Drive and watching Robert nod slowly while the doctor explained the progression, the medications, the timeline. On the drive home, he didn't say anything for a long time. Then he said, "I want to build that cottage, Margaret. I don't want to wait anymore." We found the land the following spring, 2 acres on a small lake outside of Westport, about an hour and 40 minutes from Ottawa, down a county road that turns to gravel after the second crossroads. The lot had been sitting undeveloped for years, priced low because the access road needed work, and the waterfront was rocky. Robert said it was perfect. He could see exactly where the dock would go. We hired a local contractor, but Robert was there every weekend that first summer, walking the site with his cane, making decisions, changing his mind, changing it back. He picked the wood for the exterior himself, board and batten and dark green, because he said it should look like it had always been there. He stood on the subfloor when the framing was still going up and said, "Margaret, come look at this view." The lake was flat and silver in the evening light, and the tree line on the other side was just starting to turn. I stood beside him and thought, this is what he needed. This is what we both needed. Robert died in January of 2019, 9 years after the diagnosis. He had made it to 63. By then, the cottage had been finished for 7 years, and we had spent 7 summers there and 5 Christmases and more long weekends than I could count. His walking had slowed and his hands had changed, but his mind stayed sharp almost to the end, and some of the best conversations of our marriage happened on that porch with a cup of tea and the loons calling across the water. I kept the cottage. It wasn't a question. The land was in both our names, and it passed to me cleanly. My financial advisor at RBC helped me make sure the property taxes and maintenance were covered within my retirement income. It was manageable, it was mine, and it still smelled like cedar and wood smoke and lake water in July, which was the only thing that mattered. Daniel was 41 when his father died. He had married his wife Christy 8 years earlier, a woman from Mississauga with a loud laugh and strong opinions about open-concept renovation. They had 2 children, my grandchildren, a boy of 9 and a girl of 6. In the early years after Robert died, I saw them often. We spent a week at the cottage every August, and Daniel would drive up on his own sometimes in spring just to check on things, clear the eaves, look at the dock, which we'd replaced the summer before Robert passed. I want to be honest because that is the only way this story makes any sense. Daniel is not a bad man. He loves his children. He loved his father. But he has always been susceptible to the opinions of people who speak with confidence, and Christy speaks with a great deal of confidence. It started small. It always starts small. The first summer after Robert died, Christy suggested they come up for a week in late July, the week before my usual August visit. I said, of course. They came. They stayed. They moved a few things around in the kitchen without asking. The cast iron pan to a different shelf. The mugs reorganized. Small things. The kind of thing you might not even notice if you were not the person who had arranged those mugs in that particular order for 12 years. I noticed. I put them back when they left and didn't say anything. The following summer, they asked to come for 2 weeks in July. I said yes. I asked if I could join them for the second week, and Christy said warmly, "Oh, Margaret, the kids are just at that age where they want mom and dad time. You know how it is. Maybe we can do a weekend in August together?" Daniel said nothing on that call. I could hear the television on in the background. The August weekend happened. It was fine. The children were glad to see me. Christy made a point of telling me 3 times that the mattress in the main bedroom needed replacing and that the bathroom fixtures were very dated. In 2022, they asked for 3 weeks in July. Then they started arriving for the May-long weekend and the Thanksgiving weekend as well, without exactly asking. They would text to say they were heading up. Not, "Would it be all right?" but, "We're heading up Friday. Do you need anything from Ottawa?" There is a difference. I felt the difference, but I did not say anything, which is a thing I have thought about many times since. The summer of 2023 was when I first heard the name of their friends, the Hendersons. Christy mentioned them in passing, a couple from their neighborhood, 2 kids the same age. They'd started coming up to the lake area and loved it. They have a place just 20 minutes away, Christy said. Isn't that nice? It was nice, I supposed. I didn't think much about it. By Thanksgiving of 2023, the Hendersons had been to the cottage twice that I knew of, once with Daniel and Christy and once, apparently, on their own, which I only learned because Christy mentioned in passing that she'd left a key with Melissa for emergencies. I said, carefully, that I wasn't aware of that arrangement, and Christy said, "Oh, it's totally fine. Melissa is very responsible. They barely used anything." Daniel was in the kitchen making tea and said nothing. I drove up the following weekend alone. Melissa Henderson had rearranged the furniture on the screened porch and left a bottle of Pinot Grigio in the fridge with a sticky note that said, "Thanks, XOXO." There was a child's drawing taped to the refrigerator that did not belong to my grandchildren. I sat on the porch in the dark for a while that evening, looking at the lake, thinking about what Robert would have said. Probably something dry and precise. He had a way of naming a problem without raising his voice. I missed that. I missed it so specifically in that moment. Not grief exactly, more like a practical longing for his particular way of seeing things clearly. I took down the drawing and put it in the recycling. I moved the porch furniture back. I poured the wine into the sink. Not out of spite, because it was my porch and my sink, and those were my chairs that Robert and I had driven to a furniture maker in Perth to have built. The summer before, his hands got bad. I was not going to sit in a rearranged version of my own life. That winter, I told Daniel I wanted to talk about the cottage. I said I was glad he loved it, and glad the children had memories there. But I wanted us to have a clear understanding of whose property it was and how guests were handled. Daniel listened. He said, "Of course, Mum, completely understand." He said he would talk to Christy. What Christy said when Daniel conveyed whatever version of the conversation reached her was apparently something about how the cottage was a lot of property for one person and how it made sense for the family to make full use of it. She sent me a text the following day, chipper and unbothered, asking whether I'd thought about getting a dock lift put in because they'd been looking at prices, and it's really not that expensive. In the spring of 2024, Daniel called to tell me they were thinking of buying a boat. A modest one, he said, something the kids could learn to water ski on. He asked about storage on the property. I said I'd think about it. I drove up to the cottage on a Tuesday in late April, just to be there, just to think. The lake was still cold, and the ice had only been off for a few weeks. I made a fire in the wood stove and sat with a cup of tea and looked at the framed photograph on the mantel. Robert and me, the summer, the cottage was finished, standing on the dock, both of us laughing at something out of frame. He is leaning on his cane and I am holding a cup of something, and we look, I remember thinking when I first had it printed, like two people who built something together and know it. I thought about my daughter-in-law moving my mugs. I thought about a key given to strangers without a conversation. I thought about a text asking about dock storage for a boat I had never agreed to. I thought about what Robert had said in the car on the way home from the neurologist's office in 2009. I don't want to wait anymore. I called my lawyer when I got back to Ottawa. Her name is Patricia, and she has handled my affairs since Robert's estate was settled. I told her I was thinking about what it would look like to put the cottage in a trust with very specific terms of use, or alternatively, what it would look like to sell. She walked me through both options without any drama. The cottage was assessed at just under $400,000 based on comparables in the area, which had gone up significantly since we'd bought the land for $62,000 in 2010. She said if I was considering selling, the spring to summer window was historically the strongest for waterfront property in eastern Ontario. I told her I'd let her know. What happened in October decided it. Daniel and Christy had told me they were bringing the children to the cottage for the Thanksgiving weekend, not asked, told, and that the Hendersons would be joining them for Saturday night. I had planned to be there myself. It was Thanksgiving. It had been mine and Robert's favorite weekend at the cottage. The colors, the cold mornings, the big dinners. I had not been to a Thanksgiving at the cottage since Robert died, and I had been thinking about going all summer. I mentioned this to Daniel on a Wednesday call. There was a pause. He said he'd check with Christy. The text from Christy came 20 minutes later. "Hi, Margaret. We were actually thinking this year we'd do our own family Thanksgiving up at the cottage since the kids are getting older and we want to start some of our own traditions. Hope that's okay. Maybe we could do a dinner in Ottawa together soon." I read it standing at my kitchen counter with a cup of coffee going cold in my hand. "I want you to understand something. I am not a woman who falls apart easily. I raised my son mostly alone through the years when Robert's illness was advancing and his energy was not always available. I managed an estate and a property and my own grief on a civil service pension and 30 years of RRSP contributions. I do not require much, but I require honesty, and I require the basic acknowledgement that I am a person who exists." She did not write, "Is that all right with you?" She wrote, "Hope that's okay," which is a different thing entirely. One is a question. The other is a notification. The other is a notification. I called Patricia that afternoon. I listed the cottage in the second week of November with an agent in Westport named Gary who had sold 3 other properties on the same lake. He said with waterfront at that size and condition and with the market still active for recreational property, he expected strong interest. He was right. We had 2 offers by the end of the first week. I accepted the better one. $395,000, a couple from Kingston, mid-40s. She was a teacher. He did something with renewable energy. They asked if they could have the porch chairs. I said yes. I told Daniel by phone on a Sunday evening in late November, 3 weeks after listing, 2 days after accepting the offer. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Mom, that was Dad's cottage." I said, "I know. I was there when we built it." He said, "You could have talked to us." I said, "I tried to talk to you in January. You said you'd talk to Christy." Another silence. "When does it close?" he asked. "February," I said. "The buyers want to be in for the ice fishing season." He said he needed some time to think, and I said that was fine. We said goodbye. He didn't call back that evening. Christy sent a text 2 days later. It was long and contained the phrases "deeply hurtful," the children's memories, and we were just trying to create our own family space. I read it carefully. I did not respond immediately. When I did respond, I wrote one sentence: "The cottage was mine, and I made a legal decision about my own property." She did not reply. I want to say something about that winter, because it was not the winter you might expect. I thought it would be hard, and there were mornings, especially in January when the closing was still a few weeks out, when I drove past the turnoff to the highway and thought about the lake in winter, the ice and the snow and the particular silence of a January morning out there. I thought about Robert walking to the water's edge in his boots. I thought about the loons, which would be gone by now. Gone south, which is what you do when the season changes, and staying no longer makes sense. But mostly, I felt clear. Clearer than I had felt in 2 years. I had the proceeds deposited, and Patricia helped me restructure my estate plan. My grandson is named as the primary beneficiary for a portion held in trust until he is 25. My granddaughter, the same. I updated everything. Beneficiaries on my RIFs, the TFSA, the small life policy I'd kept current. Daniel is still in my will. I am not cruel. But the distributions are different now, and the conditions are explicit in a way they were not before. There is a group of women I have been hiking with for the past 3 years. We met through a program at the Nepean Sportsplex, and now we walk together every Saturday morning. Rideau River Trail when the weather holds, indoors when it doesn't. Most of us are in our 60s. Most of us are widows or divorced or simply alone in the way that women our age are sometimes alone, not sadly, just factually. After the cottage sold, I told them the whole story on a Saturday walk in early March. The river still frozen, our breath showing in the air. My friend Lorraine, who lost her husband 4 years ago and has 2 daughters who live in Calgary and call on birthdays, said, "You know what I think? I think you built something that outlasted the building." I thought about that for a long time. This spring, I booked a week in a rented cottage on Lake Huron for July, just for myself, with a stack of books and no responsibilities. The property has a kayak and a small deck and a view that faces west, so the sunsets are supposed to be something. I have never been to that part of the province. Robert always wanted to go. I will make the tea myself, and I will put the mugs wherever I like, and in the evenings I will sit on that deck and watch the light go off the water and think about a man who understood that some things are worth building before it's too late. And I will not wait for anyone's permission to be there. I keep thinking about the rosemary. I had my hands in the soil when that text came through, and I think about that detail more than I probably should. The fact that I was doing something ordinary and patient, something that required care and the right conditions, and then in 30 seconds everything shifted. The text, isn't it? November. I wish dramatic confrontation. With a text message, with the word hope used in a place where a real question should have been. What I understand now, looking back at the whole arc of it, is that what happened between me and my son's household was not a single event. It was a sequence. Christy moved the mugs. I said nothing. She gave a key to strangers. I said nothing loudly enough. She stopped asking and started notifying, and each time I absorbed it without naming it clearly. I made the next step easier for everyone, easier for her to take, and easier for Daniel to look away. That is not blame, exactly. It is just cause and effect. When we do not speak the truth of the situation plainly, we are not preserving peace. We are postponing a reckoning, and reckoning has a way of compounding interest. Robert knew that. He was an engineer. He understood that a load-bearing problem you ignore does not resolve itself. It transfers. He would have named the problem with Christy much earlier than I did, quietly and precisely, without cruelty, but without flinching either. I loved that about him. I did not always share it. What the cottage taught me in its absence is something about what I will call doing right by yourself. Not in a selfish way. I do not mean that. I mean the kind of integrity that requires you to be honest about what belongs to you and what you have earned and what you are willing to hand over and what you are not. I built that cottage with Robert's dream and my pension contributions and 12 years of weekends. It was a physical record of our life together, and I had been allowing it, slowly and without confrontation, to become something else, a convenience for other people's summers, a backdrop for another family's traditions, a storage facility for the Hendersons' wine. That did not happen because anyone was purely wicked. It happened because I had not been clear, and clarity is something you owe to yourself before you owe it to anyone else. The strength I am most proud of is not that I sold the cottage. That was just a decision, and decisions are not difficult once you are truly clear. The strength I am proud of is that I sat with it long enough to understand it. I drove up there alone in April, with the lake still cold and the ice barely off, and I looked at that photograph of Robert on the dock, and I thought things through until they were honest. The kind of thinking, the quiet, undefended kind, where you stop making excuses for other people and start seeing the situation as it actually is, that is not easy. Most people avoid it their whole lives. I almost did. What I want, if any part of this is useful to someone else, is for that person to understand that waiting for permission to occupy your own life is a habit, and habits can be changed. It does not require anger. It does not require a scene. It required me, in the end, one phone call to Patricia and one honest conversation with my son. I'm still his mother. I still love him. The terms are just clearer now for everyone. Lorraine said I built something that outlasted the building. I think she meant more than the cottage. I think she meant the part of me that Robert always saw and that I sometimes forgot. The part that knows its own worth and does not need to be reminded by a text message with the word hope used in the wrong place. I am still here. And next July, I will watch the sun go off Lake Huron from a deck I have rented for myself with a cup of tea I made myself in a chair that no one has rearranged. That is enough. That is, in fact, everything.